Hello, you're watching TelecomTV. It's day 2 of the 3rd annual Edgenomics Summit. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content for TelecomTV, and coming up now is our panel discussion on the viability of open source stacks for the telco edge. Open source projects for the edge have delivered deployable code for a wide range of applications and users, but do they give telcos the stability and flexibility they require? Well, joining us on the program to address this and other key issues are Jason Shepherd, who is Board Chair LF Edge at the Linux Foundation and VP of Ecosystem at Zededa, Ildiko Vansha, who is Senior Manager Community and Ecosystem for the Open Infrastructure Foundation, and Beth Cohen, SDN Product Strategies at Verizon. Hello everyone, good to see you all. Thanks so much for taking part in today's discussion. Now, the first question I'd like to ask is, what is an edge stack? Beth, what are the key common elements?
So edge as a concept has been around for a few years now, probably about 5 or 6. And one of the key elements is that it is outside of a data center it's distributed across a number of elements, and there's a WAN or wide area network component of the delivery of the system. And there are sort of 2 flavors. There's what's called the telco edge, which tends to be within the telco ecosystem, i.e. it goes out to, let's say, the cell towers. And then everything beyond that is not considered part of the telco edge. But we also have edges that go out to customer sites or out to IoT devices and other types of further out. I call that sort of the more extreme edge. And there's really both of those are typically used within the telco ecosystem.
Thanks, Beth. And Ildiko, we're talking edge stack here. So, what exactly do we mean? Have you got anything else you could add to help us get an understanding of this?
Yes, I just wanted to kind of build on what Beth was talking about, because we happen to be both participating in the Open Infra Edge Computing group to figure out the details of this edge stack. And practically what I wanted to highlight is it's one thing to focus on the edge of the edge, really, but it is also a full end-to-end infrastructure from the core to the edge, as it gets referred to lately. So you still have the central data center and a few hops until you get out to the telco edge, the device edge, the far edge, and all kinds of edges that people refer to. And I think it is also important to look at this holistic view as well, especially from telecom perspective, because telcos aren't just maintaining the edge part of the environment, but really the whole end-to-end stack, at least in most cases. And I think in that sense, edge is not necessarily fundamentally different from what we all got used to in the cloud in terms of having the hardware on the bottom, having a software infrastructure layer, and then a few more layers and components in terms of how you put the applications and workload on top and how you manage those applications and those workloads. What is different in case of edge is when you have to run the application on the edge side, the footprint is smaller, and also, especially again in telecom environments, the number of edge sites scales up to massive numbers, and how you manage those large number of edge sites is something that is common in these edge stacks, and some parts of these challenges are still waiting to be solved.
Great, thanks very much, Ildiko. And Jason, what can you add? Additional thoughts from you as to what we talk about when we mention an edge stack, especially from the telco perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think So I agree with what they both said. I mean, I think there's, of course, the physical manifestation of, where along the continuum from really constrained devices out in the field to the cloud, like where are things deployed? And Beth, talked to that. One of the things that I would add is the importance to think about the stack, from a technology standpoint, regardless of where you deploy it, as two fundamental planes. You've got the infrastructure plane and the application plane. Infrastructure plane, of course, is mentioned the fundamental hardware. It's how you secure it, how do you manage it, the radio infrastructure, just the fundamentals, the compute and storage and all that. The application plane, of course, is the application frameworks where you deploy, different workloads. And it fundamentally, as a broader stack, it's really important to separate the two, because then you can build flexibility into what applications are running your infrastructure. There's a lot of people that are trying to offer everything all combined together, but I think that really limits what types of use cases and different ecosystems you can work within. So, that's a fundamental consideration. But foundationally, it's about both those planes all architected to work as a system.
Thanks, Jason. As you say, two planes there, infrastructure and application planes. Well, we're going to dive into this in more detail now. And Beth, let me first of all ask you, for a telco, what are the advantages and disadvantages of selecting a full edge stack from a single source?
So there's we've done both, and there's advantages to going with a single source in that hopefully the systems are all integrated together. Although that's not as it's not as integrated as one would expect, or if you're buying from a single source. But the disadvantage, of course, with going with a single source is you're sort of vendor locked in. There's frequently proprietary elements that don't necessarily work with our systems. So there's less flexibility. Going with multiple sources, we can sort of pick the best of breed, which, has some advantages. But we end up, as a telco, we end up doing the integration piece. Now, we actually ended up doing more of that, I think partially because we got into it earlier. We launched our first edge solution going back about 5 years now. And, we ended up doing most of the integration ourselves, primarily because there weren't, when we went to the vendors, they didn't have the tools to support these types of edge solutions. They were still thinking sort of, appliance boxes at the edge. And we had a very different vision of really sort of a mini cloud, if you will, at the edge. And the hyperscalers weren't even thinking about edge at all at that time. And the other factor, of course, with any telco is that whatever systems you launch, or whatever products you build, they have to map into our existing BSS and OSS systems. So we did a lot of integration into those backend systems to automate the deployment. I mean, as Ildiko mentioned and Jason mentioned, there's frequently thousands or tens of thousands of these distributed locations that have to be managed, and so automation is absolutely critical for making it cost effective at all. So I know that yes, telcos are used to managing hundreds of thousands of devices, but traditionally those devices have been appliances. So I know that we had to work through a lot of operational issues just to kind of get the mindset of, oh yeah, the hardware and the software and the applications are in fact disaggregated. And so that you have to, all your alarming systems and all your logging systems and all your back-end systems need to support that concept of that disaggregation. So that involved, quite a bit of integration work, quite a bit of development work to make that all work together. Maybe the single stack gives you an advantage, but when we got into the game, that single stack didn't exist. So we ended up going with a multiple vendor and multi-stack approach.
Thank you, Beth. And Jason, choice is good. We know this. But as Beth was saying, having a single source, single stack also has its advantages, and that seems to be an option now.
Yeah, and then there's a question: is that single stack more of an open base, or is it a proprietary stack? I mean, it's not mutually exclusive, this question, but it really comes down to easy button, but with lock-in, or openness and flexibility, but maybe more lift. But also, as Beth said, it's not like the easy button is just magical, solves all your problems and the like. But here also, what's different, what's happening, historically telcos serving, say mobile use cases, various different things, M to M, especially in mobile, fairly homogeneous workloads out in the field, and of course, more centralized infrastructure serving a broad number of users. But with the advent of 5G, and especially private 5G, and those networks are hyper local and have to be very specific to the context of those environments. This is where I think having more of a multi-vendor stack that is more modular, that is flexible, investing in open technologies, so you're not always you're not spending so much time building the base versus adding new services on top, because the money going forward is going to be in the business models and how you deliver new services. It's not going to be in the plumbing, and so that's a key element to understand as well. So I think full stack versus from one vendor versus multiple vendors, it really comes down to kind of balancing easy button and flexibility, understanding lock-in, but also understanding where the value is, and it's in services, not that underlying foundation.
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Jason. And Ildiko, let's come across to you for your views on this.
Yes, I just wanted to really double down on both what Beth and Jason were saying in terms of, integration challenges versus still keeping flexibility. And I think just looking back to my experience with the cloud and open source movement in the telco operators and telecom vendor environments, I'm not even sure that at this point there really is a way back to the single vendor, fully integrated, really tightly, closely integrated full stack solutions where you get the hardware, the infrastructure, software, and all kinds of components from one single source. When we talk about Edge and 5G with these systems and solutions growing so organically, new use cases popping up that have some new hardware requirements, that will have some additional requirements and challenges opened up to the software layer of the infrastructure. I don't think that it's feasible to always wait for one single vendor to sort out all those new requirements and challenges and deliver it to into your again, organically and hopefully fastly growing infrastructure and solution. And when it comes to the open source space, there have been a lot of efforts that are going into the integration work part of things as well now in open source. So it's not just working on one single component now, but the communities are also looking into how to integrate the different bits and pieces together. Like I could mention the Starting X project from the Open Infra Foundation, a project that we support. The community is working hard to integrate Kubernetes, OpenStack, Ceph, the Linux kernel, and many other open source components that are also very well known from the cloud computing era and time, and they are still actively used in Edge, and they are even more used now in the Edge computing space. And that is an integrated solution. But I could also mention the Aniket project, for instance, one of the LFN communities where we have telecom operators and vendors and also a broader ecosystem now to work on figuring out what both the telecom requirements are when it comes to infrastructure, but also when it comes to edge infrastructure now, and really looking at it from the integration perspective as well. And in both communities, looking into testing, verification, validation type of efforts to really make sure that the operators get what they signed up for. And there are also other communities like the Acrino community in LF Edge, also with a lot of projects. Some of them are, again, looking into how to integrate these building blocks together. So just because we are talking about open source software, it doesn't mean that it delivers the same challenges on the integration side. Not anymore.
Good. And it's good to hear, Ildiko, that there is a concerted effort to look at integration and address a lot of those challenges. Jason, you said earlier that there can be a lot of heavy lifting involved, when you're selecting from multiple sources. So let me ask you, first of all, how modular are such stacks? Can elements be swapped in and out as needs change, or new projects arise that offer some better functionality? In other words, is there still a risk of a lock-in here?
I don't think so, and that's a lot of the work that Ildiko mentioned. It's the fundamental principles are loosely coupled architectures, interconnected through APIs, and where you can switch different components out, and there's different choices based on the use case. And that's just kind of where architectures are going in general compared to these monolithic stacks. And that provides the flexibility. And you don't have to have all the answers today if you adopt these open technologies, because the communities will sort of continuously evolve as well. And it just allows you to place focus on where it matters. The other thing I'll mention, when it comes to the need for modularity, is that when the closer you get to the physical world, everything gets more complex. Everything, hardware, software, skill sets, use cases, everything. In historical mobile use cases, it really is a relationship between the end user and their telco, and then of course the applications they use and whatnot. But it's a direct relationship. In the broader edge sense, now it's a relationship between users and devices and different ecosystems intersecting. And with, again, as I mentioned, with 5G being so hyper-local, the odds of one telco serving all the different use cases that we're going to see in all these different environments, whether it's supply chain or retail crossover into the home or utilities, them having a stack that, them being in all these locations and having all the right relationships are really unlikely. And that's why interoperability in this kind of open foundation and the modularity, as we're talking about, is important, because you're going to have to continuously evolve. And open source, as we all say, it's a way to avoid undifferentiated heavy lifting. And that's why these efforts are so important. And so people can place the focus on value. But yeah, modularity in software architecture is the name of the game. Cloud native, platform independence, loosely coupled microservices, scale up and scale down based on needs. So it's just what people are doing now.
Good to hear. Thank you, Jason. And Beth, from your perspective, how easy or straightforward is it to swap around and select as and when required?
We do find it difficult, but I mean, modularity is absolutely the right way to go. Particularly as technology changes so rapidly. I'll use an example of some of the newer technologies, or rather the integrations, are, SD-WAN was the buzz a few years ago. Now it's very well accepted. That's primarily a software sitting on top of a box. Hardware, as Jason says, the closer you get to the hardware, the harder it is to work with it, swap it out, makes it. And we do find that, we want to do hardware disaggregation as much as possible, because it does make that modularity and architecture easier to build, drop in new modules and change modules as needs change. However, the reality is there's still, silicone still, the packets still have to hit some silicone at some point. And, unfortunately, we have found that the certification of systems still to this day requires, basically we have to certify every single box and every single combination, which is not sustainable. And we are, we're relying on the open source communities, Anakit, Starling X, LF Edge, IETF, MEF, and some of the other communities to really kind of more standardize and create those APIs to really allow us to more disaggregate the hardware from the software, and that's the ideal. And also the badging, like Anakit Assured program, allows the telcos to rely on the vendors that say, oh yeah, we've already met a certain level of tests that we know that work with CNFs and virtual workloads. So it's not that we're going to stop testing or certifying things, but if we can have a baseline, that goes a long way.
Great, thank you, Beth. And Ildiko, as we've heard, modularity is the way to go, but hardware disaggregation is very, very difficult. So what thoughts from you as to how viable is it to mix and match some of the components of the edge stack for telcos?
I would just add, going back to the point what Jason made about complexity. Complexity is something that still comes up in discussions about edge computing and use cases and solutions. And it's probably kind of a human instinct that we just want to get rid of as much complexity as possible. However, I think the way where edge computing points towards is really to accept and almost kind of embrace the complexity that we have, because it will not go away. And modularity actually is not increasing complexity, or not in a way how people would think. And if we would go back to the single vendor fully integrated solution, it doesn't mean that inside that usually black box it's not extremely complex. You just don't see it, but it still exists. And if something goes wrong, then you have less tools to fix it, and you're relying on a vendor to do that for you. When it comes to the open source space, beyond the verification programs and the Anakit Assured program that Beth mentioned, just the fact that the interfaces are open and you can also look under the hood how they are implemented, you have the chance of downloading the open source software, deploy it yourself, try it out, and figure out if this is something that would fit into your infrastructure and solution, or if it doesn't. That those things are all advantages in terms of how to address the evolution of the solutions, both on the hardware as well as the software side. As Beth mentioned in her answer to an earlier question, the ability to choose the best of breed, not the best of all solutions, but the solution that fits best into your infrastructure. That flexibility, I think, with the edge is key. How the efforts into digitalization and automation got speeded up in the past 2-3 years. I think that all really points towards everybody wants to be able to put together the best solution possible, and keeping that solution modular makes the most sense, so you can pick the hardware that you need and the software components that you need.
Great, thank you, Ildiko. Well, let's move the discussion on a bit here towards services and solutions. Beth, we're hearing a lot more now about hardware as a service, but you've been adopting this model for a while now. How viable is it for companies looking to create edge applications and solutions?
Yeah, we've been delivering hardware as a service for a while, and mostly we backed into it because we obviously have an extensive service arm of the company that already services a lot of our I'll say edge or distributed infrastructure. And what we've been finding is increasingly our customers, particularly our enterprise customers, but across the board, our customers are just saying, we don't want to be in the maintenance business. It's hard. You have to maintain a workforce. The SLAs are typical 4-hour response time, so they're pretty high SLAs, and so I would say yes, we're well positioned to do it. It's not cheap. It's not automated. Somebody still has to go out to the site and swap out that box. So hardware as a service is something that I think the telcos are well positioned to deliver, but it's not. We're just kind of moving the blocks around. Somebody has to do it. And is it the telco? Is it a third party that does service delivery, or is it the company itself? But it's still basically the same. Somebody has to go out. We call it truck rolls, and deliver a box to replace the whatever maintenance or whatever needs to be done.
Thank you, Beth. Ildiko, some thoughts from you about this this model, hardware as a service model, and how viable it is when it comes to edge applications and solutions?
I think just similarly how edge computing kind of is an evolution path to cloud computing, I also see this area as part of that evolution in terms of bare metal as a service, or bare metal clouds have been around for a little while now. Like I could mention the Ironic project that is part of OpenStack. It is a component that takes care of provisioning and managing your bare metal infrastructure, so you can treat physical servers like how you did treat virtual machines, and really just apply the same flexibility in terms of adding more or using less and powering them off when you don't need them. So it really is just kind of going more out to the edge. Like if you think about physical servers being deployed in shipping containers and put down next to stadiums and other areas where you need some additional computing power to deliver services and new use cases. And when it comes to the Ironic project, I also heard of one of the usage of it where someone in Italy, they used the code base and developed it further to make it a viable solution for their smart city use case to, again, provision and manage hardware, but not large data center scale hardware, but IoT devices. And I think they named the component Iotronic, which is just kind of a funny name, but it really just shows how you can take an open source component that was designed for large data centers and apply it to an edge use case and really take it as far as the far edge, as we often call those really small devices.
So much innovation in this industry. It's amazing, isn't it? Thank you, Ildiko. We've just got time for probably one more question in today's panel, although we will have many, many more in the after show later on. Jason, let me put this one to you. Edge frameworks are all well and good for developers, but do you feel that they are accepted, understood, and used optimally by telcos?
I don't think they are today yet. I mean, I think that we're still in a transition period. Beth mentioned the challenge with legacy and kind of adapting. Of course, we're talking about modularity being super important. That's the direction things are going. The open source communities are kind of leading the charge there, but it's a necessity to go after these models. One of the challenges also on the hardware as a service question. I think viability, there are challenges, as we've talked about, but it's still a necessity, because how services are delivered and how compute is delivered, and basically the whole goal is to extend the public cloud experience out into the field. It's important. One of the big trends, what we're seeing too, and this happens in all markets, rarely do the incumbents in a market lead the tech trend. It's usually a challenger that doesn't have the legacy infrastructure that comes in and innovates faster and then starts to pop in. In this sense, of course, the telcos and in all these markets, the incumbents have the relationships, they've got the footprint, but they don't necessarily have all the latest and greatest technologies. And it's challenging because you have to migrate from legacy, whereas the challengers don't have the relationships, but they can go straight to technology because they don't have technical debt, legacy infrastructure. And so I don't think that the telcos personally are paying enough attention to how things are changing. I think the cloud scalers are a big threat. Granted, some of the cloud scalers are partnering with telcos, that we're seeing. But as the cloud scalers, if they win the data gravity and they're increasingly coming to the edge, that locks everybody out. And then you've got even the big OEMs and whatnot. So that are threatened. So long story short, is everyone kind of taking it seriously and paying attention, and including some of the new innovators out there? I don't think so. Should they? Absolutely. And because of the 5G transition, especially private 5G, it is changing who delivers the networks. And I think if the telcos aren't aggressive, they basically can get bypassed by new types of service providers that just come in and offer those hyperlocal networks, and then they get to kind of win over customer share over time. So I think it's just critical that people really pay attention to these communities so they can focus on delivering new services.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. There's certainly a risk there for telcos. Beth, we know Verizon's at the forefront of a lot of innovation in these areas, but for the telco community generally, do you feel that not enough telcos understand and use these edge frameworks?
I would argue that the telcos are actually quite sophisticated users of edge frameworks and have been for a long time. Certainly our operational support systems, have been pivoting, but they have been pivoting, and I question whether newcomers can really build up that infrastructure, on the not so much the technology side, but on just the operational efficiency side of the house that the telcos have been doing. I mean, we've been doing those for decades, and that's much harder than bringing in new technology. Building those processes, building the operational, driving out the waste, automation. That's what the telcos are really good at. And are we doing it fast enough? Probably not, but we're certainly working hard to do that. I mean, I think that we do understand that it's all about automation. It's all about modularity. It's all about flexibility. It's all about hardware disaggregation. It's all about distribution, delivery out to the edge. All of the things we've been talking about over the last, during this session, are all driven by operations. It has to run in production. You can't treat it like, some of the gaming companies have they'll just throw in some code and if it doesn't work, we'll just back out. You can't do that when you're running a telco. You have to make sure that whatever you're putting in place does work, and it's a mindset that's built into the telco DNA. And yes, sometimes it means that we are somewhat risk averse. On the other hand, telcos are at their heart engineering companies. They're technology companies out to, down to their core. So, we're really good at deploying new technologies. And I think that we can, in fact, stay ahead of the game.
Thank you, Beth. And it comes back to the age-old comment that perhaps we just need to go faster and we need to implement faster. Jason, a quick response back from you, I think.
I mean, I totally agree. Like when it comes to, from a telco standpoint, working across a lot of consumers, the footprint there, the history, the expertise, the operationalization of all of that totally makes sense. But when you get into private networks, and as these open source technologies start to commoditize the plumbing, now private network for, say, a factory floor, that changes the game in terms of who can come in and deliver that network. And we're also seeing even the industrial players start to do it, and some are partnering with telcos, some are not. And so that's what's fundamentally different, is as these technologies get commoditized, as things become more modular and interchangeable, all the things that we've talked about, and as networks become hyper-local for new types of edge use cases, not mobile devices, that I definitely agree that telco's got the leg up there. It is going to change who and how these networks are delivered, and you're going to win by merit, not lock-in in the new world. It's how fast you innovate, not whether you own the stack.
Thank you, Jason. Well, we must leave our discussion there for now. Thank you all very much for taking part today and sharing your views with us. If you're watching this on day 2 of our TelecomTV Summit on Edgenomics, then don't forget to send us your questions and we'll try and answer them in our live after-show program later today. And please take part in our online poll, which you can find below this video play window next to the Q&A app. This is a question we are asking all week, along with 5 multiple choice answers for you. And we'll review the votes during the after show. Don't forget to take a look at the other panel discussions in this year's Edgenomics Summit. For now, though, thank you for watching and goodbye.